Hello and welcome to part 3 of SASS and Compass for web designers. So far we've seen what applications are available for SASS, and we have set up our project, so we're good to go. Now first I'm going to open this image in a new tab, and we're going to use this image as a reference. Before we do, let's just use a little trick here and let's style this just a little bit. I'm going to say margin is 0 auto and set the width of the body to be 600 pixels, which is the image size, and then just take the HTML element and apply a background color. Background color is going to be gray. Click off of it. Yep, like that. And when we close it and zoom into the image, then we have a centered image, and this just looks nice. So we are going to use this just as a reference. I'm going to close this tab right here, and we're ready to start working on the CSS. Okay, so the first thing to do is open up blankwork.net, and blankwork is a semantic grid system. Now what that means is that traditionally in CSS, when we were using a grid system, we would say something like class equals grid underscore 12, and this would automatically apply styles to make the header full width. Now instead of that, now in SASS we can say header and @include column 12, and that would do the exact same thing, but instead of polluting our HTML markup, we're keeping this in our CSS. You know that we can nest our CSS selectors inside of SASS, which is really great. Now I can say H1 and H6, and they're both going to be compiled to be associated with the header. Now H1 and H6 both are going to have 2 columns, and also our nav element is going to have include column 8. Now let's just modify this slightly to make this reusable. Instead of saying include 12 columns, we can just delete everything in here, and it's automatically going to assume that we want the maximum amount of columns. And now we have 2 columns for both H1 and H6, which results in total of 4 columns. And let's just subtract the total number of columns by 4. And now if we decide to change the total number of columns, this is automatically going to be full width. Both of these are going to be still 2 columns, and the nav element is automatically going to fill up rest of the space. Now just in case you are wondering where did the variable underscore columns come from, it came from blankwork.scss file, and we saw this in a previous movie. We have our default value of underscore columns of 12, and if we want to change that to something like, I don't know, 24, then we could just do it like this. But I'm pretty fine with 12 columns having our 960 pixel grid, and we're just going to leave it at that. Now there's one more change that we have to do here, and it is in the header column. Because header contains columns, it's not exactly a column itself. Header is actually a container for columns, so we can just say @include container, and if we don't pass in any parameters, it's automatically going to assume that we want to have a full width container, and that's exactly what we want to have in here. So header is going to be the container, and H1, H6 and nav are going to be columns inside of header. So I'm just going to save that. Let's move on to the introduction. So let's scroll down a little bit like this, and I'm going to say class of introduction. We want the introduction to be actually a container as well. Even though we're not going to have any columns in here, I'm just going to say container and not pass any parameters in, because now it's automatically going to be full width no matter what is the number of columns that we have set in our grid system preferences. But actually a container isn't the right word for this, because I want my code to be a little more readable, because introduction is a container. That doesn't say much. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to full width. Full width is exactly the same thing as container. It's just an alias of the word. And we're going to look at aliases in just a second. First things first, I'm going to say that the slider is also going to include full width. And actually, we shouldn't do it this way. We should say introduction and slider are both full width, like this. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is style our pitch. Now, the pitch is actually 3 divs. All of them have a class of pitch, and then we have a left, middle, and right. I'm going to say pitch, and each pitch is going to be a column of the total number of columns divided by 3, because we have 3 divs in here. And right now is actually the perfect time to bring in some images in here. So I'm just going to save this file and copy some images that I already have, because this tutorial isn't for PSD to HTML and CSS. I'm not going to be slicing the PSD file in front of you, but because we need to be on the same page, each time I'll add some images, I'll tell you what images I add and what size they are and where they are. Right now, I'll add these images right here. So I'm going to go into images folder and paste in pitch and slides. Now I have a folder for slides, but I have only one slide, and because we're not going to be covering any JavaScript in this tutorial, one slide is perfectly enough. I'm just thinking ahead of time in case you want to extend on this design, then you would probably want a slides folder for your JavaScript or something like that. Let me just change the view here. Now the slide 1 is 960 pixels wide, and the 3 images inside of the pitch each are 320 pixels wide. Now let's go back to our browser with this screen.css saved. I'm going to close down blank work and open up our current design here, and I'm going to refresh the page, and this is how it looks at the moment. Now we are going to have our images inside of each empty div. So let's just go in here and say that the empty div is going to be 320 pixels wide, so width of 320 pixels, and it's going to have a height of 129 pixels. And just for the moment, let's say that it's going to have a background color of yellow. If we save that and go back, then you see that we have a big yellow square which has shifted a little to the right and is not properly aligned. And that's because these columns right here are not actually 320 pixels wide. They are 300 pixels wide, and they have 10 pixels margin to the left and 10 pixel margin to the right. And that's how most grid systems work, and blank work works similarly to them. Now usually grid systems also provide something called alpha and omega, and that's what we have here as well. So if I say that the first div is going to be include alpha, and the second div is going to be, oh no, I'm sorry, the right div and the left div. That's what they are called. So the left div and the right div are both going to be alpha and omega. And if we save that, actually I need to say and left and right, and we're going to see just in a moment what this compiles to. But if we go back to our browser, you can see that now the big yellow square is aligned to the left and aligned to the right as well. Now let's go back to our code here. So what does this ampersand mean here? What is and dot left? Well, and references the parent selector. So this should compile to pitch dot left, and in CSS this means that something that has both pitch and left. So let's open up our screen.css file and screen.css and scroll down. Then you can see that pitch.left has a margin left of 0 and pitch.right has a margin right 0. Close that. And now I know what you're probably thinking. I don't want to learn Greek and SASS in the same lesson, and I certainly don't want to speak Greek inside my style sheets. And well, you're absolutely right. So let's make an alias for our alpha and omega here. So I'm going to make a new file and I'm going to save this. I'm going to call this settings.scss, and now I'm going to make an alias. And we make an alias like this. We say Mixin. So this is going to be a Mixin still, and we're going to call this first, and it's going to call another Mixin, include another Mixin, and we're going to include the alpha right here. And we can do the same thing, Mixin, last, include omega. And now if we save that and import it at the top, settings, then instead of saying include alpha and include omega, we can just say include first and include last. And this is how blank work works also with the full width and the container. It calls the same function, but you can have different names for it just to have a better readability of your code. And notice that we can do this without even touching the markup. You can have cats and dogs in your markup instead of pitch left and pitch right. And that means that sometime in the future, instead of class left and class right, you could use first child and last child. And you can go ahead and change that, and you'll still be saying that the first child has an include first and the last child is include right. So we are not dependent on HTML classes anymore. Now, of course, that's true only for a part of all of this, because well, we still need some classes and some IDs to identify our markup, but we need them significantly less than we used to in a traditional grid system. Okay, now let's jump forward and let's scroll down to our aside here. And inside of our aside we have 4 sections, so I'm going to say aside, and inside of the aside we have section, and we're going to include column, and again variable columns divided by 4 because we have 4 of them, so this is going to result in 3 columns currently, and if I change the amount of total columns sometime in the future, this is automatically going to get the correct value in it. So if I'm going to save that and go back to Chrome, then here if we scroll down you can see we have 4 columns in here and a footer in the bottom. So our layout is almost finished, but we need some more changes in here. If we go back to our final.png file and scroll down to the bottom, you can see that the left side of these columns are actually aligned with this right here. So that means that we actually need to apply left in here. And let's just go back to Sublime Text. And so the first column that we have here is the section class about, and I'm just going to say about include first, and the last section that we have here is contacts, so contacts include last. Save that and go back to the browser and reload that, and now yep, we have this aligned properly. Okay, so now that we have our skeleton ready, we're actually ready to start applying styles instead of just making our layout. So we're going to start by making the logo area in here. Going back to Sublime Text, and let's just jump here inside of our header. We're going to have a padding here of padding, and I'm going to say 68 pixels and a space for H1. And now we need to pull in some more images in here. So sprites are absolutely amazing in Compass, and it's by far one of my favorite features in Compass. And that's just because Compass makes spriting so much easier than anything else that I've seen. Now I'm going to paste in another folder of images, and these are going to be our sprites. And you see that I have a bunch of small images in here, and let's just walk through the images. I'm going to go back to Chrome and open up our final.png file. So we have here arrow left hover, and arrow left, arrow right hover, and arrow right. We have a bottom logo, which is right here. We have 2 dots, the empty one and the filled one. We have the logo of the site, and we have 4 social icons, which are right here in the footer. And we are going to have all of these as a sprite and as a super easy sprite in Compass. Okay, so how does that work? Well, let's open up Sublime Text, and in the top portion of the CSS file, I'm just going to import from the sprites folder everything.png. And now I can say @import spr sprite logo, and oops, sorry, not import but include. So @include, and also I can include hide text, which is a Compass mixin that hides text. And we also are going to specify 91 pixels of height. And if I save that, Compass should run, and it did. Now we have to go back to our browser, reload the page, and there we go. This is simply amazing. But what did Compass do? Well, let's open up Finder and find out. Now, Compass created a new file called spr_something_something.png, and if we open it up, you can see that it took all of these images inside of the SPR folder and compiled them in here. Now we have a sprite file, and if I were to delete, for example, all of these social icons in here, and then go back to Sublime Text and resave this file, then I could open up Finder again, open up a new spr.something_something.png, and you can see that all of social icons have been removed. Now if I add the social icons back in here and save this file again, then you can see Compass automatically creates a new file, and we have all of our social icons back in here. And I can reference them by the file name without the file extension, just like I did with the logo. See, here we have logo.png, and I just include SPR Sprite logo, and that's it. So in my opinion, this is one of the most amazing features of Compass, because you don't have to worry about sprites at all. You can just put new images in, and Compass is going to spit a new sprite out, and it's going to set the correct background positions wherever you need them. So this is simply amazing, and it's going to get even better as we are going to see in the future tutorials. Okay, so if you have any questions, comments, or something you want me to cover, please leave a comment, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time in part 4 of SASS and Compass for web designers.